Good morning, everyone. This is Michele Hughes from Ageless and Timeless. We're doing audio only today with our wonderful guest, James White, who is the CEO of KBMO Diagnostics, which is in Hopedale. Probably never heard of that, but Hopedale, is that how you say it? Hopedale, Massachusetts, right?
Yeah, that's right. Just
Well,
just outside Boston.
yeah, so I grew up in, I told you this, but I grew up in South Natick, which is
Very
right
close
next
by. Yeah.
right next to Wellesley College, but I never heard of Hopedale. Sorry about that. I lived there for what, 20 years till I went off to, or 19 years till I went off to college. So
That's
I'm
fine.
sorry about that. It must be a very little town.
It is. It's very cute. But
Yeah.
nowadays it's just off 495, so it's a good spot. So
Oh, okay. So it's easy for people to get
yeah,
to you, and right in the technology corridor then, huh?
exactly.
Yeah.
Just off
Well,
the Mass Pike, the dreaded Mass Pike. So yeah.
yes. Well, I have a funny story about that because when I met my husband, who we met at 14, he was going to Harvard and I was going to the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, but our parents didn't want us to keep seeing each other during college. They thought that it was time after 8 years to, just branch out and have a little dating experience. So we didn't want to let them know that that wasn't happening. And my father bought me a car for using at campus, but he didn't know that every weekend I was driving that car on the Mass Pike, and I was going right by the Natick exit. And every time I would go there, I would be holding my breath that my father and mother would not see me because they were out shopping somewhere or something. So
That's a very Massachusetts version of star-crossed lovers, doesn't it? So there we go. Nice job.
that's what it was. But they didn't, and we actually ended up, obviously violating their wishes. But yet we went through all through college and then got married. So
Excellent.
it was a happy ending. But that Mass Pike always reminds me of
That's hilarious.
my weekly trips to Cambridge. So, James, welcome to Ageless and Timeless. We're so happy. I've been looking forward to this since I met you at the A4M show in December. And, well, I didn't meet you, but I met your people and did your little amazing little blood prick that tells you so much information, which we'll get to in a moment. But the reason I've been looking forward to this for since December is that I wanted to do a microbiome series, knowing how important this subject has become in the minds and lives of many people who are health conscious. So, and I am having Dr. Rob Silverman in 2 weeks, and I know you two are collaborating.
Yep.
And he, of course, is another microbiome, or at least say the GI tract.
Yep.
You're both very expert. So let's start by telling us more about you first, because people want to know who you are. Where did you come from, and how did you get here?
Yeah, so as you can probably tell from my accent, I have to tell everyone I'm from East Boston on the basis probably further east than most people imagine. So I'm originally from the UK or London, and we moved over here about 19 years ago, so nearly 20 years ago, and my children don't quite sound the same as me. They've got the Boston accent, but that's okay. And we've really enjoyed living over here. And in that time, I was running a UK public company, and we had operations in beautiful Pasadena, Atlanta, and then Boston as well. So we moved over here, and I kind of felt that New England was a great place to bring up our children, and so we did that. And that really is the foundation of the name of the company. So it's called KBMO Diagnostics. K is for Catherine, my wife. B is for Ben, my eldest son. M is for Max, my middle son. And O is for Livia, my daughter. And so, we all have bosses, and they're my four bosses. So it was it seemed like a good way of naming my company to have it named after the foremost important people in my life. So that's how we kind of got here 20 years ago, running a UK public company, which was we sold off a number of the divisions to various companies like Roche, and so it went very well. And we weren't very keen to kind of head back to the UK. We really liked living in Massachusetts, and so I came across a company called at that time Brendan Bioscience, that was being headed up by my technical founder of KBMO, a gentleman called Dr. Brent Dorval, who's not insignificant claim to fame, was invented the first rapid HIV diagnostic. And so
Right.
he'd moved into this kind of whole area of food sensitivity, and we can talk about the difference between allergy, sensitivity, and all these things. But he kind of
Right.
moved into this area, and so he and I kind of got together and partnered about 10 years ago now. So that's really how we got here. It was originally running a different business, and then kind of once we kind of sold that off, moved into this area of food sensitivity. So that was the genesis. And again, there's so many bright, intelligent people here in Massachusetts and the US as a whole who are looking at healthcare. But obviously, as you mentioned with your husband in Harvard, there's many universities in and around this area. And so we've really enjoyed being here, and happy to talk about a bit more about our company and some of our great employees that we've had who are all from this area.
How did you not get a Boston accent, but your kids did?
It's so funny. It's in the UK, it's a bit more common than I think over here. But generally, people have what they call a gap year, which is you leave high school and you have a year of kind of bumming around the world. And so a lot of my friends who went kind of through it via Australia came back sounding like, they'd grown up in Australia. I think you get past a certain age and you're kind of stuck with what you're stuck with. So I'm stuck with this one. So I guess I'm okay with that.
Well, just as a segue, when I came to San Francisco, which was many, many decades ago now, but so I consider myself a San Francisco local, not a native, but a local. But anyway, when I came here, the people that I met couldn't understand me. They always made fun of me, and I had a really, really bad. I mean, not bad, but a very strong
Yeah.
accent. And look, you grow up there, that's what happens.
Yeah.
I don't know how I got rid of it. Every once in a while, maybe if I have a glass of champagne or something, I have people say, "Oh, I hear that Boston accent." But mostly it's gone. But I'm so grateful for that. When I come back to see my family and I hear that accent, I think, I can't believe that I actually have that accent. And
it's a great charm, though. It's a good one. So we
it's a good one. But
they know where they come from and they're proud of it. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, that's good. Well, let's talk about KBMO then, and I want people that are, our viewers. Well, today it's our listeners. I want them to understand what exactly your testing can do for them. So that's our goal for the podcast. But in the meantime, I'd like to hear a little bit the science, and maybe start with that open-ended question first: is what is the difference between or among those terms which people hear all the time: food allergy, food intolerance, food sensitivity? If those three were put on a screen, how would you differentiate?
Yeah, that's a great question, and unfortunately, the medical community are as guilty as consumers in terms of the kind of interuse of those three terms. So I think it's a fair place to start in terms of kind of giving people our understanding of how they differ to make it more sense of it. And so allergy is generally what we describe as an IgE reaction, and it is kind of cause and effect. So think of child eats peanut, instant reaction, and generally a very severe reaction. So think things like prophylactic shock. So an allergy is a immediate response and generally a very severe outcome to it. So that's the allergy. And as I remember hearing from one provider, he was an MD, he said, generally, James, I don't test for people over 20 for allergies. If they're still here at 20, then they don't have an allergy. Which was maybe he needs to work on his bedside manner, but it was kind of certainly stuck in my mind. And then if you think of food sensitivity, which is what we do, again, it's an immunological response, but it's a delayed response. Up to 72 hours is delayed. So that makes it much harder for a patient or a provider to work out which food a patient might have consumed in the last 72 hours is leading to the symptoms that the patients present with. And those symptoms, to be honest, Michele, are many and varied, which makes it harder for them to work it out. So the difference is the time as well as severity of response. And that's really the best way to think about it is an allergy is instant, the sensitivity is delayed, and generally those symptoms are much more varied. So again, they may be kind of non-specific autoimmune system type reactions,
And so
migraines, arthritis, things like that. So there are many and varied versus an allergy which is more prophylactic shock and more severe.
More severe. So what does IgE stand for, and what does IgG stand for?
Yeah. So it's just an immunoglobulin E and an immunoglobulin G. So again, an E, it's just a different pathway, as it were, in terms of, you think of sometimes like cardiovascular testing, they'll test you for a number of different cardiovascular markers, and for the IgG there's one pathway and the IgE is another one. And so they're both immunological, but it's the IgG is the one that we measure, and it's a slightly different pathway from the IgE.
Today's podcast is brought to you by Qigenics. From stem cell therapy to lifestyle coaching, Qigenics is the perfect place to go for all your health and wellness needs. This health clinic is amazing at getting you personalized medicine and wellness that is unique to you. Use the code Ageless and you'll get 20% off your first service with them. Go to www.qigenix.com to find out more information about these powerful methods.
Okay, and then is food intolerance just kind of in the middle, or is that
food intolerance is more things? Think of things like lactose intolerance and stuff like that. So that's another different kind of format. Again, slightly in the middle is a good way of putting it, but probably slightly below the IgG in terms of it's an intolerance versus an immunological response in terms of the IgG is.
And what does complement mean?
So you now come into our kind of specific specificity or the specific nature of our test. And what we do is we measure not only the IgG, but the subclasses, the IgG 1 through 4, but we also measure complement activation. So we're looking at two parts of your immune system. So there's the acquired immune system, which is the IgG, and then the innate immune system is the complement activation, and that's the complement that we measure. And what that does is, to kind of simplify it a bit, is IgG is a great way of finding out which foods you're exposed to, i.e. what you're consuming. And the complement activation, the innate pathway, is an inflammatory response. So in essence, what we do is we try and work out what you're exposed to with the IgG. But then what we go on to do is measure of the food you're exposed to, which ones are causing you an inflammatory response. Because if you think about it, an inflammatory response is the underlying cause of most of the symptoms that patients present with. So a lot of tests are out there, Michele, which are just looking at that IgG pathway. And one of the reasons I got very excited about working with Dr. Brent Dorval all those years ago was he didn't just stop at exposure, because again, we all need to be exposed to foods, let's be clear. But what he worked out was, let's not just look at what you're exposed to, because that would come up with a long list of foods, and they're not all relevant in terms of what you need to eliminate to reduce the symptoms you present with. So he went on, and that's the brilliance of him, to say, well, why don't we look at which foods are actually causing an innate response, i.e. the complement, which then gives you a way of really zeroing in on, frankly, a much smaller list of foods, which is focused on the inflammatory response, and so then correlates much more tightly with the symptoms a patient presents with. And so that's the big difference about our test. And it's the reason why we're the only test in the world that is patented, because of Dr. Dorval's brilliance, looking at the IgG, i.e. the exposure, but then going on and looking at the inflammation as well. So there's some great companies out there measuring IgG. The limitation isn't them, it's that pathway, because it's only telling you what you're exposed to.
So is that what the Alcott and the Everywell or whatever that one was?
So Everywell's looking at that. Alcott's slightly different. It's looking at how your white lymphocyte cells swell. But the reality is there's multiple reasons why they swell. And so sometimes, what I hear from providers is that's why that test, again, very accurate at measuring that swelling of the white lymphocyte cells. But in reality, there's multiple reasons why they may swell. So you end up with quite a few false positives. So that's the issue with that. But it's, again, very accurate, But again, there's multiple reasons why the white blood cells not only link to food sensitivities.
Yeah, and I think honestly, you have an obstacle or a challenge to face because the history of testing has been very spotty, and a lot of false positives that people then take as kind of a generalized, okay, this is not really worth doing because I'm going to get a lot of information that's going to scare me or make me go down a path that is inaccurate. So how do you overcome the history of testing, of food sensitivity testing?
Yeah, and it's a very good point, Michelle, because again, when I got involved in this area, I was like anyone else. You look at Google, or I think it was probably Yahoo back in the 10 years ago, but you look at Google and you kind of go, well, what does it say about food sensitivity testing? And you're right, there are some pretty negative articles because of that focus on the exposure versus the inflammation that we look at. And so when I got involved in the business, I did my due diligence to see how does it differ from some of those other companies out there. And for me, again, there's I think it's a pretty key thing that if your business and your company and your product is based on sound science with some very good scientists around it, and then really what you need to then is communicate better your message. That's an easier story to do versus if you've got poor technology to start with. Doesn't matter how good your marketing spin is, it's going to fade away. And so I think the nice thing with our technology is based on really sound patented technology with the gentleman that invented the first rapid HIV diagnostic. So from my standpoint, that's why I was so excited to get involved and own this business, was because the very sound technology, brilliant scientists based around it as well. And from that place, you can then explain the differences, as we were talking about earlier. It's not just measuring exposure. It's the brilliance of Dr. Dorval looking at the exposure plus the complement in terms of that inflammatory pathway that we described. So that helps you reduce those false positives. And equally, when I got involved, there was only a handful of doctors running the test, but they were all telling me about these amazing outcomes they'd had from using the testing. So it was very gratifying to think, well, wow, I wonder if we can take this to a larger number of providers versus where we were at the time that I got involved.
So taking a deep dive into the actual testing, first let's start with inflammation. I think that term is bandied about. So why don't you define what is inflammation and how does a person know they have inflammation?
So I think there's a long list of symptoms that we're very fortunate. We've gone from probably just under 10 providers to nearly 10,000 providers in the last 10 years. So we've had some explosive growth in terms of the number of people running the test. And I'm often asking the providers, and it's one of the highlights of my day, that we do lunches with many providers most days. And so talking to them about success stories and to your question, how do they use the test and what are the types of symptoms? And so they'll talk about weight loss. They'll talk about kind of brain-related issues like migraines, anxiety. They talk about arthritis. And so if you think about most disease states, the underlying cause of a lot of them, the root cause of them, is an inflammatory response. So whether it's skin-related, all those things are inflammatory related. And so by measuring the complement, we can get to that root cause of those different symptoms and identify if there's inflammation linked to your diet. We can help reduce that inflammation. That, again, we're never claiming we're going to cure anything, but if you can greatly reduce that inflammatory response, which is causing that symptom, then what you would hope to see is a cessation or a great reduction, in the symptoms that patient presents with.
Yes, I think the issue for a lot of people that, like, when we're talking differentiating between food allergies and food sensitivities, is that it's more subtle. Food sensitivity is more subtle. Allergy, like you said, is more extreme, and so people can live their lives and say, "Oh, I don't feel so well," but they don't know really the subtle reason is that they're reacting to certain of the foods that they eat probably on a daily basis, not knowing. Like gluten, for example, is a big culprit. Dairy, another culprit. So we'll talk about that in a moment. But I think.
I mean, it's a great point. I mean, I'll give you just a brief example of that. I was talking to a doctor many years ago, and he said, "Look, I'm not going to run your test, James, because I know I'm sensitive to eggs." I said, "Well, why don't you give it a whirl and just try?" And it was really interesting. He didn't come up for eggs; he came up for oranges. And so I said to him, "I said, what do you have with those eggs every morning, doctor?" He said, "Oranges, orange juice." That's exactly. So again, it's that point where sometimes you'll assume what you think it is, but until you why guess? Why not test to make sure you can make sure that you're actually eliminating the right food? And in his case, he was close, but no cigar, as they say. So the idea is, what you want to do is make sure you test to identify. And I think that this is the great thing, on an individualized basis. And I think we all recognize now there's no such thing as one size fits all in any walk of life. So what you want to do is try and make sure, with medicine in particular, how do you individualize your test to make sure that as an individual those results are unique to you. So Michele, you may be sensitive to eggs, I may be sensitive to dairy, but we need to know on an individualized basis which foods they are, so we can eliminate those from our diet and help improve whatever the symptoms that we have that we present with.
Well, I think there's another part of this too, and that is that your food sensitivities can change. So let's say you do the test in December, and then you do another test in June, 6 months later. What have you found when people are testing? Even let's just say they've done the elimination, but now those foods have disappeared, or most of them. However, new ones appear. So, this is what I know in the past when I've done the doctor's data, the SpectraCell, those tests have food sensitivity tests. I could do them and they change. So how do you deal with that? The fact that these food sensitivities do change.
Yeah, I mean, SpectraCell, I mean, all of them are looking at slightly different, elements, but I think what we see is that there's a common list of foods, and again, because we're running these multiple pathways, it helps in terms of the reproducibility, which is kind of what you're getting at, i.e., if I test it on a Monday, will I get the same results on a Friday? Now, clearly, your system is changing the whole time, but generally, what we see is a really good commonality. Again, reproducibility, and part of that is, again, don't let it keep harping back, but it's one of the things that excites me when I got involved was when we run the test, our testing and our manufacturing, our approach is under that real infectious disease approach from Dr. Dahl and his HIV background. So we run 15 standards and controls per patient to make sure the testing is highly accurate and highly reproducible, which I think is what you're getting at, Michele. And that's the big difference here, is can you make sure that you're producing a test which is highly accurate and highly reproducible? And I think that was the thing that excited me when we got involved 10 years ago, and we've only improved it over that time.
So going back to the question about how do you know you have the symptoms that are causing these reactions. So you mentioned, the weight loss issue and the brain issues, or brain fog, or memory, those kinds of, because of the gut-brain connection. But what about within the GI tract itself? I mean, do people have like, the feeling of being bloated, or what are the signs that a certain food is causing you to have an inflammatory reaction?
I mean, they're diarrhea, they're all of those, IBS type symptoms. In fact, we did a study on IBS on 100 IBS patients. It was an IRB approved study. So again, it went through a medical board to make sure that, we were doing it all the appropriate way. We took 100 patients under the guidance of a gentleman called Dr. William Estefy in Los Angeles. And so this study took 100 patients, 50 in the control, 50 in the intervention, and we tracked all those various symptoms that you talked about there, and to see, could we improve them by eliminating those foods from their diet. So we tested them on day one and then 6 months later, and we saw a dramatic reduction in a thing called their IBS severity score based on eliminating those foods. And in terms of that elimination diet that you talked about, so you went from identifying the foods, eliminating them, and then retesting them. And we saw dramatic improvement in their IBS severity score. And what we also measured at the same time is a thing called high sensitive CRP, which for clinicians is a general marker of inflammation. And what was really encouraging for us is we saw that come down dramatically as well. So again, not only by eliminating these foods do we see their symptoms improve, which is important from a patient perspective. We saw, for example, the number of days lost at work, because again, these IBS patients, it's the number of times they have to visit their providers is really high. So that came down, but more importantly, from a scientific standpoint, their overall levels of inflammation as measured by high sensitive CRP came down precipitously as well. So it was nice to see symptoms improving for the patient, but then as well, in terms of how do you define that? When we looked at inflammation, we saw that come down directly, as a correlation of that. So that's what we've seen with this test when we've done it in an independent study. And I think that's one of the things we're very proud of, that we've done independent studies. Because if you do it yourself, or you have your lead scientist as the lead author on these things, you're probably going to get the answer you're looking for. So it was nice to do independent studies to see that we could get that through independent physicians running the testing.
Well, so just to confirm those terms so people understand. So IBS means irritable bowel syndrome, and CRP is C-reactive protein. C-reactive protein is used a lot with cardiovascular testing to see whether you should always be under 1. Or 1 or below, right? So that's a marker of inflammation, but it's more than just cardiovascular, as you've just explained. And the other thing I noticed is that people who have food sensitivities often have acid reflux or GERD. I guess that's called GERD. They have problems with their digestion, and that in itself it's a debilitating experience for anybody, that when you eat something, you don't feel well after you eat, instead of feeling nourished, which is what food is your medicine. It's supposed to nourish you, not make you feel sick. So all that you're doing, I honor you and congratulate your efforts to do this, scientifically, and with true medical expertise behind the science as well, and with 10,000 providers confirming that it works.
Yeah.
So congratulations on that.
And I think that's the nice thing. It's when we first got involved, we were doing some stuff through the insurance companies, and the insurance industry is regardless of how people view it. Some people will get things paid for automatically because it's covered on insurance. So for me, the gratifying thing is we're doing all these tests and people are paying out of pocket for it. So again, patients believe in it, and to your point, more importantly, providers do. So again, it's not, well, I'm going to run it because it's covered by my insurance, so I don't really care. It's very much, they're thinking about it, and they're choosing the providers wisely, who've gone and done the extra work to say, look, let me seek out some of the tests that will help, move me from, let me be on 10 pills a day to, let's eliminate some of those drugs that I'm on, and let me see if I can look, as you mentioned, food being my medicine, and identify which food's actually my medicine versus, which ones are actually causing me, issues like you mentioned of GERD, diarrhea, and some of these other symptoms that come along with them.
So, James, it's really overwhelming when you're, as the individual. I'm sure you can relate to this, as you're not a medical doctor. You're a consumer just like the rest of us, even though you're running a company that's in the medical field.
Cool.
So I think you can be very compassionate to people. So you do know how overwhelming it is to make the right choices when you're trying to take responsibility and be proactive with your health. So do you have any advice, or how would you guide people, and why should they do the KBMO test as one of the protocols in that health regimen that they're going to be investing in. As you just said, many people are paying out of pocket for your testing.
Yeah. I mean, I think what I found is that, we've been fortunate that I think over the last 10 years, there's been a move to more patients understanding that, they need to take control of their own health and invest in their health, as your Ageless and Timeless suggests, that you don't get there by accident, you get there by investing and being aware of what's on the market. And so what we've tried to do is partner with the right physicians who, it's a great test, but my view is, it goes from good to great by working with a good provider who can look at the supplements and other things that involve. So we've very much focused on the idea that, let's provide a good test and then some of the compliance tools around that and the provider network, which I think kind of brings it all in together. Because, as ever in life, it's very rarely one thing that you need to be working on. It's everything and around. It's lifestyle. It's, and lifestyle encompasses many things, doesn't it? So the idea here was to think, how do we come up with a test and what's the best route to kind of giving patients access to that? And our view is, let's do it through a good network of providers that has grown, who are looking at these kind of areas. And so that's how we found the best way to do it is work within a provider network. And again, if patients are, are looking at, who's the right person to work with, they can contact us, and we've got an extensive network of providers out there now. And again, we've got some people who we work with remotely. I can think of a lady called Dr. Silke Heiner, who's one of our star providers. She's been doing this for 10 years plus now, and on top of that, she runs all our meal planning. So we provide these compliance tools for patients so they can get their results on their phone. They have a meal plan which we now individualize per patient. So again, when you get your results, you've got something to follow. Because to your point, in terms of things being overwhelming, Michele, we keep our report to 3 pages. And that's not because Dr. Dorval kind of ran out of things to say after 3 pages. That was because for most patients and most providers, everyone's busy. We want to try and keep it so it's simple to understand and communicate that messaging to our clients. So the report is color coded, red being bad, green being good. So again, often, and I'll put my consumer hat on, I've sat opposite doctors who kind of run through results and fire numbers at me that frankly mean nothing to me. So that was one of my kind of things. Can we make this report easy for the layman like myself to understand versus going, I want to be the smartest guy in the room. I'm going to give you all these strange kind of spider webs and numbers up the yin yang, which don't mean anything, not to the average consumer. And so that's why we've tried to do it, is to simplify it. So, it was done by a PhD, but we want, more importantly, for the 99% of the rest of us who aren't PhDs to be able to understand it. And so I think that's where, as you say, not being a doctor is kind of helpful, because I can look at it as a consumer and say, how can we give you a report that you might understand? What's the first question I'm going to ask as a consumer? Okay, doc, you've tested me for all these foods. What can I eat? So that's why we put in place, the meal plan, so they've got something they can actually follow and move forward on their journey to wellness or agelessness or timelessness. So that was the thinking behind, our testing, is make it simple for the patient to understand, because then you'll get good compliance. Because if we don't get compliance, to your point, that's when patients get kind of a bit grumpy, because they're going, I spent money on something, but I don't understand. Now I've got the results. What are the next pathways forward to actually turn that piece of paper into a meaningful change in my lifestyle?
So this is the interesting question that I think a consumer has. At least I do, as one consumer. So how can a little prick of blood that at the A4M show, you put your finger out, they prick your finger, and they put it on a card, and that tells you so much information. How do you go from A to B to get that prick of blood to tell you 176 food sensitivities? And then further to that, now with your new product, the gut barrier panel, which we'll talk about, how can one little prick of blood tell you so much?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So the blood cards that we use were first invented for infectious disease testing, as well as heel stick testing, which is done in infants still today. So they use that way as a very convenient way of storing the blood. And then what we do is when that comes back to the lab, it goes through a process of elution, which basically means kind of taking that dehydrated sample and rehydrating it. And then we then take that sample and then run that in the testing. But again, if you think of things like 23andMe, you're doing a buccal swab on the inside of your mouth. You're taking a bit of spit, and then they come back with thousands of genes and pieces of information there. So the healthcare industry is used to taking a kind of almost dehydrated sample, rehydrating it, as it were, in terms of the patients, or amplifying that signal as they do in kind of the genetic world, to kind of enable it to kind of give you the answers that we can. So that's where we were very fortunate, again, with Dr. Dorwell. How do we create a easy to use sample? And now we do many samples. Many of these kits are sent to patients at home to run the test at home. It gets sent back to us, and then they can go and talk to their provider to review those results. So again, as you say, it's an easy to do test, a little finger stick. It gets mailed back into us. The results get sent to the provider, and then the provider can then review those with their patients. So again, we've tried to make this as simple as we can. And it's fascinating for me. We're always looking at, are there other technologies and techniques that can enhance and improve that process even further? So we're constantly on the lookout for other ways of doing it than we're doing it now. But again, it's a very robust technology, and it's using things like ELISA plates and ELISAs, which we make those plates here in house. So again, we've got a manufacturing facility which is done under FDA registration and ISO 13485, and then our 2 clear high complexity labs are under clear guidelines as well. So again, it's a highly regulated industry that we work in, and again, we like that environment because again, it enables us to give, I think, very accurate and reproducible results we put out to our patients and the providers, and more importantly, their patients.
So what are, just as in terms of results, if over time with 10,000 providers, you've obviously seen a number of different results, and what would you say, if you want to make a list, what are the 5 most common food sensitivities that you see?
The big 3 are eggs, milk, and wheat. And then they can vary from there. But again, there's probably 6 or 7, but those are the 3 that I think of, because we developed a rapid test, and when we said, what are the 3 things we should put on there, we said, let's do eggs, milk, and wheat, because they're pretty synonymous in lots of things, and I found that to be a good grouping of the big 3, as it were, to kind of measure for. Now we measure for 176, and again, we were thinking when we kind of expanded our panels to think about, if you think about, how are people exposed to some of these foods, and so and we measure colorings and additives now as well, because there's 3 different ways of doing it. Is it in a processed food? Is it in a supplement, or is it in a personal hygiene product? And so a good example of that is I was talking to a provider the other day, and she said, they had a 9-year-old boy who was very lethargic, and they really couldn't work out, what was going on. But we tested him for the colorings and additives, and he came up really high for benzoic acid, which turned out was in his shampoo, conditioner, and his mum's washing powder. They eliminated the benzoic acid, and within a couple of weeks, he was back to being a normal 9-year-old bouncy boy with plenty of energy. So I think the reason I mentioned that is, those colorings and additives are increasingly in processed foods, supplements, and personal hygiene products. In fact, I think I was reading an article the other day that said, a lot of patients who are, overeating or have obesity issues, 50% of the food that they're consuming is processed. So on that basis, you should really be measuring those colorings and additives that we include in all our panels, because they're increasingly showing up in the food chain where they never were meant to. And a good example of that, you think of the red dyes and things like red velvet cake. That was originally invented by Bayer after World War II to color plastics, with no concept that would then end up, all these years later, being used for, being consumed by patients in terms of in red velvet cake. So And there's other examples of that where, some of these colorings and additives have been have been now in the food chain, and they were never created to kind of come up with that way.
Mm-hmm. So you have this new product, the gut barrier panel. Could you talk to us about zonulin and occludin and all the aspects of what it means?
Yeah, absolutely. And the reason we came up with looking at the gut barrier panel, which is in essence for consumers is really a leaky gut panel, was because when I first got involved 10 years ago, I'd wander the streets of New Hampshire at the time as I was looking for some sales. And in between the kind of tattoo stores and karate shops, there's quite a few naturopaths in New Hampshire. And so we were talking to them all about, look, here's our food sensitivity test. Are you going to adopt this or not? Unfortunately, lots of them did. But some of them would say to me, James, I don't test for food sensitivities because I think my patient's got leaky gut. And so it kind of stuck in my mind that when you say, what do you mean you think? Are you testing for that? No, we think they've got leaky gut. So I thought, well, why don't we come up with a panel that enables them, rather than to guess that they can test for that. And so that's what we did. And we said, and again, if you think about leaky gut and any of these gut issues generally, it's a bit of a continuum. It's not just one single marker kind of cures all. So we thought, let's put down a number of markers that can help us look at the kind of that gut barrier in terms of those tight junctions and performance. And so we came up with 3 markers, as you mentioned. So we came up with Candida, which we use as a kind of early kind of canary in the coal mine as indicator that there may well be some leaky gut going on. Then we developed our very own zonulin assay, which again looks at zonulin, which is a marker of how well those tight junctions are functioning. So are they opening and closing? And the other great thing about zonulin is it's what they call a reversible marker. So if you've done some damage there or some issues, with the right protocols, it can be repaired. And thirdly, we thought, we've looked at an early stage marker. We've got how well they're functioning. Why don't we look at the structure of those tight junctions as well? So we decided to measure occludin. And so those are the kind of 3 markers that we measure. And we look at them with 2 different kind of lenses, as it were. We look at IgA 1 and 2, which is basically, IgA is a thing called a secretory marker, which means it's found localized in the gut. And so again, we thought, let's look at IgA as a localized marker, which is kind of early stage. So if any of those markers are elevated, then it's an earlier stage onset of what might be going on. And then we looked at the IgG complement, which we run on all our foods, to say that's more later stage and systemic. So it's gone probably beyond the gut at that point. So that's how we came up with this panel, to give people thinking of leaky gut more as a continuum than a single marker is going to cure all. So we found it's been an amazing time since we launched that in September. We've been on a very steep upward kind of trajectory since then. So I think providers and patients, again, are loving the concept. This is kind of almost 2 tests for the price of 1. We've been very careful not to increase our pricing. And again, we can do that because we develop and manufacture all the products in-house. So again, we're not seeing some of the inflationary pressures if you just buy these tests from third parties. So again, because we do everything ourselves, that's enabled us to pass on a much more attractive proposition to our patients and the providers at the same price as we were when we were just looking at food sensitivities.
So you don't have a supply chain because you're vertically integrated. So you're, that's a very important point.
So some of the bigger companies go, well, China's not kind of letting us have what we need. That's not our problem. Everything we have is here. And again, we've worked very hard to make sure that we're, as you say, vertically integrated to control the costs, and kind of old fashioned, but let's look at everything locally so we can source everything locally. And we've tried to do that as much as we possibly can.
So James, if you, if the individual, can you still hear me?
Yep.
Oh, okay. Because my power just went off. I don't know why. We're having issues here.
You've got the gremlins in your house today.
Yeah, Tony, am I okay? I think you and I are good, but I don't know if Tony can hear me.
You're good.
Oh, okay. I'll keep going then. My screen went black. Okay. It says entering power save mode, whatever that means. So, because we're almost at the end, James, I want to cover a couple more things that are very important. If someone were to eliminate all the food sensitivities that come up on their test, would that automatically cure their other side of the gut barrier panel if they're showing leaky gut, or at least the beginnings of leaky gut? Is that a one-two step?
I mean, there's two different elements if you think about it. The foods are trying to identify which foods are causing inflammation. And again, if you eliminate those foods, then you should bring down the inflammatory response and then definitely see a cessation of the symptoms you're presenting with. When it comes to the gut barrier panel, we recommend looking at using a kind of, we've identified three really good companies, a company called Biotics, Nutritional Frontiers, and Nutridyne, who have excellent products to kind of help treat the leaky gut. So what we'd say, if any of the 6 markers on the leaky gut panel are elevated, then you'll talk to your provider, who will then kind of recommend one of these good gut healing protocols. And so that's been one of the great things, is working with some of these real experts in the field of, okay, so we've identified the problem. What are some of the protocols we can help give to providers, i.e. patients as well, of those supplements that make sense? Because as you mentioned before, Michele, that can be, again, a very confusing field for patients in terms of trying to work out which is the right supplement. So we've gone back to some of the best companies in the industry and said, what are the best supplements you would recommend if you're looking to treat inflammation via the foods, as well as look at the gut barrier panel in terms of trying to help patients heal the gut. So I think it's, rather than do one then do two, it's almost like, I'd say, look at both areas, and then the third one would be looking at some level of supplementation, and working fourth one with a really good provider to help attack these things on multiple fronts.
So could you do us a favor and have your office send me the list in an email of those 3 companies and the products, and the actual products, like if it's a probiotic or whatever the product is that would be good for people to know about. I'm going to put that on my website with our podcast, if you'll have someone do that. That way people can see it. And then,
again, Michele, that might be a great one to talk through with Dr. Silverman. On the basis, I know you've got him coming up the next few weeks, because again, he's a provider. We're just the lowly laboratorians here, so he can help walk you through where it makes sense to use those various products.
Yeah, and he likes orthomolecular. He already talked to me about that company. I don't know if you work with them at all, but
I think there's some great products out there. So again, he can certainly give you some insight into the.
Well, this is why, one of the reasons I'm asking is because I know from experience that probiotics, it has one of the worst records of getting through the GI tract because of the acid in the stomach. So it never gets. So it's kind of, people throw their money away. So I want to be sure that our viewers and listeners will know which of the doctors and the professionals like you know are efficacious, and they're not going to throw their money away, but they're going to get results. So if you can do that part,
so I'll provide those 3 for you. As I said, we've asked the experts to kind of come up with one of the best products, so that they've come up with those. So we'll happily share those with you and your listeners.
Yeah, that would be great. In Ageless and Timeless, we try to be not only generalized so that people get a big picture of information, but we also like to go very specific to protocols, to ways that you can take the steps that are going to follow the macro with the micro, so to speak. So yes, we like to give concrete information to people, and we also have a segment of our website, an icon called Michele Recommends. And on there, if it is a company that does have product, for example, we will recommend, if we're convinced, we will recommend those products. And usually, our guest will offer some kind of a consideration to our viewers. So all that is good. We're trying to integrate everything so we can make this an easy voyage and journey for people to great health. All right. So because we're coming to the end, I want to be sure that we do ask you, whether you want to offer anyone that's viewing and listening today or will be on the internet, anything to get them to go to some of the providers to get this test. So just give us a little bit of what you'd like to offer and what you'd like, how you like to incentivize our viewers on using your product.
Sure. Again, as I said, we work kind of really through providers versus direct to consumer. But having said that, we have an excellent provider in Dr. Silke Heine, who I mentioned earlier, who does all the meal planning, but is a doctor of nutrition in Germany, and as I say, has been working in this field for 20 plus years. So what we would do is, if you contact KBMO Diagnostics, we can link you up with Silke. And then what we'll do is we'll give you for one of her packages of running the test and then reviewing the results. We're happy to give a 20% off discount for anyone who quotes Ageless and Timeless for Silke, and then I'll make sure that we do a deal of 20% off any of your patients or listeners rather who come on and kind of work with Silke. And so the best way to get hold of her is if you contact KBMO at info@kbmodiagnostics.com. That's info@kbmodiagnostics.com. I'm sure Michele will put that up on the website anyway. And then that way, and we'll give you that code of Ageless and Timeless. And if you quote that, then I'll make sure Silke does a 20% discount.
Okay, and then and when you give me that list to put on Michele Recommends, would you add her name to that? Even though I know people.
Yeah, we can give you Dr. Silke's details, and then that way you'll be in good shape.
And then one more, I did find out coincidentally that my physician in Beverly Hills, Dr. Nina Sachdev, which is Sachdev, has used your product, your testing. That was exciting to me because I obviously didn't know you before I went to Las Vegas to the show. And then when I was chatting with them, they said, "Oh yeah, we've been using their tests." So, so her number, if people want to reach her and use her as a provider and ask for the KBMO test, is area code 310-777-7511. And Dr. Nina, Sachdev. She's fabulous. She's really great with immune health and hormone health. Well, she's an anti-aging physician. So, and I will add that to my website as well. Well, James, I knew the time would go by really fast, and sorry we couldn't do the video today, but I think it's all good, and we covered a lot of ground, and you've been great and very knowledgeable, of course, in helping people without, there's no salesmanship. You don't need to sell this. This product sells itself. Yeah. And so that's the great thing.
Exactly. That's the nice thing being a small private company, where it's all about making sure that we can service and give good product services. That's what drives us. It's, we've got a great team of people here. We're very fortunate that, we can employ such smart team of good local people here who can impart that knowledge, all around the world, frankly, is what we're doing now. So again, we're very fortunate that we can offer these such great products. And again, we don't need to push them. It's one of those things that we've now got this great word of mouth because again, the team does such a great job of looking after the clients that we have. So again, it's a great privilege to be running this team.
I think this is really the next step. People are getting smarter about the responsibility of their own health. And I think recognizing, artificial intelligence is going to become one of the big telomere management, DNA management, stem cells. All these things are so much more technologically based, and people are going to have so much more information through the internet available to to avoid the pitfalls, try to take the steps that are going to work, like food sensitivity testing. It's a baseline, really, because 80% of our immune system is in our GI tract. So if you don't focus on your gut, you're maybe just skirting the main culprit for your illness. And if you could just fix your gut, you might find, in fact probably will find, that other things, symptoms that you have will clear up. So, well,
And
thank you.
I think you hit it on the head, Michelle. It's like if you can focus on some of those basics, like what you consume, and again, and
Right,
don't even complicate it beyond that, and then work out
right.
which of those are damaging or actually good for your immune system, then you're going to go a long way to ageless and timeless health.
And I love that you keep giving me a plug. Thank you. Well, when I created this podcast 3 years ago, it really was with that intention that people could live agelessly and timelessly as long as they take the proper steps. And that requires information and is power. And that requires giving every week that we do this information that's going to empower you to be the best version of yourself and to live a long and healthy life. Who wants to live a long life if you're not healthy?
Absolutely.
So thank you so much, James. I really appreciate your being
My
here.
pleasure. My pleasure. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to your very knowledgeable base. So thank you.
And I'm supposed to tell you all today that you're supposed to. I never think to even sell my podcast, but I guess you're supposed to hit the subscribe button that we're going to have on the screen if you want to keep knowing more of our podcast and when we're producing a new one. And also you can hit the bell, ring the bell if you like what you heard today. So I guess I'm not very salesy about this, but I want as many people as possible to avail themselves of the information that we provide through the guests like James White, who are so gracious to give us their time and share with us their knowledge. So thank you very much, everybody, and have a beautiful day. Take care.
Thank you all.